Good evening and welcome to the Fourth Estate. We're here to critique the media for the stories that they've covered this week, the angles that they've taken, what they have missed and what they have covered in great detail. And of course, today we are back to the panel debate. A lot of you have been asking for the panel, so we will have a panel today. I have with me some of the brightest political journalists we have in our time. So let's start with you, Agatha. Introduce yourself and then we can have Suleiman.
Agatha Taire, an independent journalist, and I am happy to be here. Good evening, viewers.
Suleiman.
Thank you, Raymond. Good evening, viewers. My name is Suleiman Kakaire, independent journalist. I'm still a journalist, by the way.
But you have crossed into the
I teach as well, and I'm into politics, but I'm a legal practitioner. And above all, I'm a Ugandan who is interested in a better Uganda, not based on the imperial design of it, but a Uganda that speaks to every soul.
I wanted us to start with the biggest story this week has been the opinion poll that was released by Research World International together with the independent peer group. And everyone focused first, of course, on the presidential candidates and the polls they've gotten, and we have them right on the screen behind. And you guys have been in newsrooms before. When you get a report like this, is this the first story you're looking for, and why is it the first story you're looking for?
Is that question for me? Or?
Okay, we can start with you and then we'll come to
it. Yes, we have covered opinion polls. For example, yesterday I was thinking this is Wakida's season. He's always popular at around this time because of the opinion polls. And when we are covering them, I think we have a tendency of taking the opinion polls as the gospel truth. I think as journalists we need to give it context, tell people why are opinion polls, like why should we care about opinion polls in the first place? Why, what is the relevance or consequence of opinion polls in the election? And we can do that by looking at the history of, contextualize it. Look at the history of opinion polls. Look at how many times opinion polls have got it right or when they have got it wrong. And here in Uganda, there's an example. Dr. Besigye has been asking this same organization published an opinion poll in August 2015. That was still at this time, a few months to the election, and still gave him 17% of the votes. And he got 27 this time. And Museveni, who had less than, who had 50 something, I can't remember the figures. But I think it's important that when we are reporting, we look at that. We look at the previous opinion polls vis-a-vis the actual results in the end. And you know, when opinion polls started, I think the very first one was about 1924. At first, they were like accurate. So they would come and until in 1936, where there were two opinion polls, one saying that Roosevelt would lose the election in the US, and another one giving him a landslide victory, and won by gap. So when you look at those, give the people this context and say they are not, it's not a finality, that what the opinion poll is saying is actually what happens. Especially the politicians that are fighting over it, that this is a way of rigging, that yes, they influence, they might at some point influence the outcome of the election. Maybe some people will look at it and say, okay, if this is the one winning, let me abandon my candidate and vote for this one. But in the end, they are not that final. Yes.
Suleiman, when you pick an opinion poll like this one, what's the first page you run to? And why do you pick that page out of the many?
Well, that is purely shaped by my ideological framework of how I look at governance. I look at governance through institutions and issues, but not individuals. And when it comes to individuals, I look at character of an individual. Unfortunately, opinion polls don't point to character and track record of the individual options that are put forward for the participants in the polls. But there is a measurement on the issues, a measurement on the institutions that purely shape the governance of the country. I would be much interested in them. Like, for instance, this poll alone, I would look at what is the public ranking of the Electoral Commission. We are going for an election. how many Ugandans have confidence in the Electoral Commission that this will deliver what they want? If I'm in the newsroom, I look at the issues, and if you are also on the other side of the coin as a participant in elections, like for instance, if you are a candidate, you are a political party, you'll be much interested in knowing what are the citizens interested in. And those are some of the things that will guide my appreciation of the polls. But just before you pose this question to me, you put the same question to Agatha. And I just wanted to clarify, you by way of explanation also made mention of the fact that almost every newsroom has focused on the individuals. President Museveni, Robert Chagulanyi, Kizza Besigye, General Muntu, Norbert Mawa and Henry Tumukunde as the individuals. That framing by the newsrooms is informed by our personalizing of politics. Few of us would be interested in going deeper to explain what would be the issues, and as such we've limited the debate to individuals and not the institutions. I'll tell you, like for instance, if you look at this poll, almost like less than 50% of Ugandans believe that Electoral Commission can organize a free and fair election as envisaged under the law. That tells you much about the fact that you have a big percentage of the population going to polls when they already know that the one organizing the polls will not deliver free and fair elections. And I believe, considering the time when this was measured, when this survey was done, almost 6 months ago, almost 5 months ago.
Before the lockdown.
Before the lockdown. If a similar poll is conducted today with the scandals that have happened at Electoral Commission, the perception would even go down, the percentage of Ugandans. And that speaks to the fact that now you have a big portion of the population going to polls when they already don't believe that it will be a free and fair election. And it is augmented by the fact that you have also a virtual election where people are debating a scientific election, is how credible is it or not, and you see that there is a debate about its legitimacy. That also affects the public perception of Electoral Commission, which in a way also confirms what Thandika Mkandwile calls choiceless democracy, where people basically don't express their wish as they so deem it fit, but those to be voted choose their voters. And it will speak also to things like voter turnout, people stay away from elections. So I would be much interested in those discussions around that. Then you go to things like the economy. You see that a big percentage of the population don't think that things are right. Now, if you are in the political position, you are either a change-seeking, part of the change-seeking forces or democracy-seeking forces, you have to know how to design your campaign. What things, what issues are Ugandans talking about? What portions, what parts of the country are people contented? Like, for instance, I'll give you just, I'm just making a small summary.
In conclusion, because I want us to move to the discussion on, he mentioned that they're individuals, the focus on individuals. But if you're an editor, quite honestly, and you guys have certain newsrooms, you have to sell a newspaper in the morning, you have to attract viewers to your station in the evening. And viewers look out for the people that they support. So the editors have to make this balance between what people say are issues and individuals, because sometimes the individuals are also the issues in the debate. Shouldn't newsrooms honestly be cut some slack for choosing the individuals because people want them?
Is that...
Let me start with Agatha. Okay. And then
well, I think that makes a lot of sense. But what Kakai is saying, you're talking about how do we incorporate other issues. You can lead with your Bobi Wine at 22% as they lead the picture that you've led with, but have an article that explains all these intricacies. For example, Kakai talked about the issue of confidence in the EC, and that brought me to another bit that we need to cover as journalists when it comes to opinion polls. Look at what influences respondents vis-a-vis what influences a voter. Because with respondents, you know, you find me there, you ask me a question, I can answer. But when it comes to voting, it's not as easy. We have in 2016, where elections were delivered 12 hours late, and people couldn't sit and wait. And yes, that brings into the issue of voter turnout. You have people that while I am okay to answer an opinion poll, I am not okay to go and vote where I know that my vote will probably not count because of the confidence in the Electoral Commission. You have issues that researchers call non-response bias and response biases. You have the way that these pollsters are going to ask a question. Like all these things are things we should, in our stories, explain to the people that actually this is an opinion poll, but these are the issues that influence this result. This is how this result comes about, and it's totally different from going to the poll to vote, actually. Yeah, so if you're going to lead with your individual that is going to sell the paper, but let someone who buys the paper, and it's not that everyone wants to buy a picture, let those people who want the substance also find that you have given them all these, you know, all these, what happens, how an opinion poll is carried out, what does it take for someone to answer it and answer it honestly, and what does it take for someone to go and vote in an environment like we have here. Yes.
Kakari, I also want you to answer the intricacies of reporting, because this poll came out at about midday. So the reporter has about 4 or 5 hours to work with all this. You have 67 pages of data to work with. You have to break it online, because that's the way newsrooms are built now. You break it online, and after you break it online, then you start working around the flesh and the meat. Is this model perhaps the reason why on the first day when the poll came out, we didn't have as much flesh in the papers?
That is partly one of the reasons, but not purely the model only, but even the human resource. Because you need a story on methodology, a report on the report itself. There is too much speculation that has been happening, that these polls are manufactured polls, they are sponsored, a view which I partly don't buy, because more of the talk around it is telling but not showing how that is. Now you need someone to go and talk about the story of the polls themselves. When were the polls conducted? How was the data generated? An analysis around it. We need a more credible explanation, and let me say a more interesting conversation around why was there a delay. Me and you know that these polls were in the public, at least a portion of the public that we relate with, for almost a month ago, because I got to know about this like more than 4 weeks ago, about the polls and how things were. But you see, let me tell you now, the mode adopted in the reportage of the poll is influenced by many factors, which you've talked about the mode that you see in the .com age. You have to be the first on the story. You want to break it. But here they are not being the first on the story. They are doing not sport journalism. If you want to be on the first on the story, they should have just leaked the poll. Then two, the human resource. You cannot explain shoddy reporting by the fact that we didn't have time. You must have a team that dedicates time to a particular story and know that we want to be the lead people on this poll. And what do you look out for? Someone should have done just a story on the individuals, the people that society is looking at as options. It could have been a deep read on its own, written by one individual. Someone does a story about methodology, because like what Agatha has pointed out, survey researchers are not a panacea themselves. They are not the best way to measure individual behavior, because an election is individual behavior. It's not purely an expression of opinion, it's behavior. That's why at one point you can have Besigye scoring at 17%, and eventually when he goes for an election he's scoring 35%, at least by the figures that Electoral Commission give us. Whether it's a true reflection of the outcome, that is a debate for another day. But I'm trying to tell you that there is always those varying things, because quantitative research, is not the best way to measure human behavior. Here we are talking about expression of opinion, which keeps changing from time to time. That's why my colleagues who have debunked the outcome of the polls, I keep telling them that, you see, this is descriptive research. It's telling you what was the situation then. If you're right, you can think, if you're optimistic about everything, you think about what the polls are saying, concentrate on it, and work on it. Or if you don't believe in it altogether, sanction a completely different poll and find out what is the situation. Because you want at every stage of your decision making to have information and facts before you make any decision. The last thing I want to talk about in respect of what methodology do you adopt. Let me tell you, news reporting, I am one of those people who don't believe that there can be something called objective reporting. It's influenced by our individual biases. A story like that, how it was shaped around 47%, Bobby Wine 22, Best 17, it can be framed differently. By looking at the previous poll, the last conducted poll, what was Museveni's score? Today is at 47%. Was that the percentage he was at in the last poll? 2, if today he scored 47% when going to the polls, was that the score he had in 2016 before he went to the polls? And what were the improvements? Those give more nuanced explanations, and they enrich the debate and the discussion around the polls. The last thing is in respect of where are the gray areas? Where do you have to focus? And the newsroom, because I don't believe that a newsroom must be passive in any kind of democratic struggle. A newsroom must be part and parcel. It's the building block. It's the platform of engagement. How we frame and shape the debate eventually shapes the final political outlook of the day. Now, if you're a newsroom which is interested in those acting as a building block for the democratic dispensation, you'd be much interested in a conversation around things like economy, things like institutions, electoral commission, things like the post-Museveni and the confidence in the government. And I will tell you that majority of the population do not have confidence in the current dispensation. And these are interesting conversations. But you see, when you carry only a headline saying that President Museveni still leads, there you are legitimizing the dominant forces.
All right, thank you so much, Kakaire. We're going to take a very short break, but when we return, we talk very deeply now about the sources that the newsrooms relied upon and how different this story could have been. Thank you so much for staying with us. We are on the Fourth Estate. Of course, the debate is still about how the media covered the opinion poll that was released this week. An opinion poll that has split the divide, particularly even amongst politicians. I want us to switch gears now to the sources that the newsrooms relied upon to tell this story. I've been paving through all these papers, and majority, if not all the sources, are politicians themselves. I don't see the ordinary person. I don't see scientists who are capable of analyzing polls. I don't see even politicians who are not in the race. I don't see them as part of the sources that they relied upon. Were you satisfied with the sources that the media relied upon?
No, me personally, sourcing like that wouldn't satisfy me, because I started by saying that I would love a story that is explaining, that contextualizes this opinion poll, that puts in perspective how responding to an opinion poll is different from going to vote, how opinion polls have shaped the outcome in the previous elections. So that's why I started by telling you about the 1920s when that just come. I think people used to take them as the gospel truth until 1936, 38 there. and 1948 when Harry Potter won the election where he had been dismissed. So for that reason, I cannot be satisfied with a poll with a story that only has Kyagulanyi saying, what do you think of the opinion poll that gave you 22%? What context does Kyagulanyi give to that story? But if you looked for a researcher who has, not necessarily the one that has conducted this opinion poll, but who has conducted an opinion poll before, if you look for a social scientist who is going to talk about what influences people to answer these questions, or even the people that went to the field, not Wakida himself, what questions were they asking? Yeah, and yes, look at what we call political analysts, because they must have studied the trend of opinion polls before. So for me, that would be a story that covers all the things that the reader wants to know. Pick someone and ask him a question yourself as a reporter: who would you vote? There's an opinion that says this. Who would you vote? And if he says Kyagulanyi, ask him why, so that we get an idea of why people answered the way they answered. Yeah, that sort of gives you a context and an understanding of opinion poll. I am sure there are so many Ugandans who are wondering, what is that about? Does that mean an election has been conducted and won? Like, why do we make it such a big deal? Yeah, so a story that explains that would require that you look at the many people that would explain it better, not necessarily a politician it affects, or
Kakaire, the sources relied upon, are you comfortable with them?
Obviously, I can't be comfortable with the sourcing. I will not differ much from what she's saying, that you needed to go beyond the normative way of doing things by saying that an opinion poll has come out, so you ask the politician how they feel about it. That is obvious. It's a given. But they needed to give us, to look at the story of the losers and winners, requires looking at other people who think about appeals, these opinion polls, to give it a more contextualized interpretation. And that requires, because this is descriptive research, this is descriptive data, it requires more explanation. In 2011, there was an interesting book that came out, Hybrid in an Election Regime, which was edited by one of the people, was Sabit Makara. And there was a whole chapter dedicated to an analysis of opinion polls. I think Nicholas wrote the first chapter, the first theme of that chapter. But when Nicholas was writing in that book, it was analyzing the election of 2011 and how opinion polls conducted by Afrobarometer were a true representation of the reality out there based on the outcome of the polls. Nicholas argued and he framed it like the opinion polls were actually right. They gave a correct interpretation, and they were the best formula to understand what Ugandans think about and their perceptions about the election. Julius Kiza made an interesting analysis of opinion polls, that these opinion polls miss one important thing: the contextualizing of the setting. How do you conceptualize even the system of governance? Most people think this is a democracy where people will expressly state their option, their opinion, and it's a given and it will be respected. And yet you're dealing with a hybrid regime, semi-authoritarian, semi-democratic. It falls within, but at the end of the day, the overriding force is the military outlook of the regime comes out at every turn of the moment, whenever the power of those with it, whenever there is a threat to the power of those with it. And that's very important if you're reporting opinion polls, to have voices that speak to the debunking of that theorizing in respect of people who believe in qualitative research. Because you see, this takes you back to the epistemological debate, discussions of epistemology. How do we come to know? There are those who think that human behavior is out there, it can be studied, and it's divorced, that the reality out there, it is divorced from the human. And from the context, you as the researcher, you're living, and you set out, come up with measurements, go, capture it, bring it, and it will be the same all the time. Then there are those who believe that you are part and parcel of the construction of reality. And that's when you get ethnography, things like in-depth interviews, which could have given more in-depth data to help you understand and contextualize the opinion polls themselves. Lastly, because I don't think we have time, let's look at this opinion poll from an optimistic point of view in respect. If, for me, who is left-wing, and also I think about it from a perspective of a democracy-seeking force, that our concentration must be in the regions where people think, where people are frustrated and have thought about the system and think that they have expressed the view that they don't have confidence in it. They are the deplorable of society, and those regions are clear. That is Busoga, Buganda. Then you have the concentration where you know that in Toro, people, like almost 60-something% believe this government has performed well.
But even on the economy, Toro
even
and
on
Chigezi
the economy,
said
there is a correspondence that when you ask them, those who feel good about, those who are living, are they good, neither good, they are saying good or bad. You see that Ankole, Karamoja, Chigezi people, majority of them, they think that the situation is good or very good. Then you have majority of people coming from Rwenzori, Busoga, Bukedi, Buganda, who are saying that things are not good, things are not okay. And if you study them very well, you see that Rwenzori has been, particularly Kasese area, they have been voting opposition. Then when you go to Busoga, the opposition has been making some inroads. Leave the thing of how many MPs, but you just look at the scores down the ranks in respect of performance. Then you look at areas like Bukej area, those areas, I think we should put more focus there. But before we put focus there that we are going there, here in these areas, what are the issues that are driving people's opinions? You get it, and so we have to understand. Are
you suggesting that the newsrooms could have done better if they had superimposed
if it's a newsroom interested data in becoming a building block for the democratic dispensation? Unfortunately, I don't think either inadvertently or it's incompetence or it's by design, but I think it's purely mediocrity in the newsroom, the way we are reporting. Because
but
I have to tell you, I can't say that most of the journalists are more interested in legitimizing the system of governance obtaining today, but most of them perhaps they don't know what issues to go for.
But newsrooms have shortcomings. The education,
that I believe.
Funding is one of the shortcomings. They can't be able to afford.
And even focus.
Yes.
Even focus. So, a newsroom which is focused in making a story of this nature, a big story of the day, they should even assign 8 people to report just an opinion poll. And you know that within 1 day, 2 days, we are done with opinion polls, and we do follow-ups later. But you see them concentrating on picking one story, then they go back to the poll. When they are handling another story, they go back to the poll in their programming in respect of feature programs. And I don't understand. It's neither here nor there. And you end up seeing that the story has not become an area of focus. It's not an area issue to be focused on by even the public. So they don't even enrich the debate. They don't crystallize it.
Agatha, I want to ask you, would you deploy eight reporters for a story like this? And if you were to deploy them, how would you deploy them? Because many of these users are really held up in terms of resources. Even the well-managed ones would not put 8 reporters on a story like this. If you were to deploy, say, with a thin newsroom, how would you deploy to get the best story out?
I'll start by responding to what you said, that this opinion poll report came out at midday and you're expected to run a story the next day. And that's why we have follow-up stories. For now, just report the news of what?
Break the story.
Yeah. Then tomorrow, have someone that, you know, the problem is I don't know if on this show we have addressed these issues before. You don't have even senior reporters that have cultivated sources. For us, we used to be told to cultivate sources take someone for lunch, even if you don't have anything to ask them.
Oh, that day you are not working on any single story, but you just take out someone.
That day comes when you need them. They have that confidence in you, and that's something that we lack now, because, and we have talked about issues of lack of poor payment. People can't stay in newsrooms where they struggle to feed their children forever. That's why we have this exodus of the senior reporters. They keep going, and then you deal with interns, people that have no institutional memory, and stuff like that. But I would, if I owned a newsroom and I make decisions, I would, on an opinion poll like this, put my best reporters, and 8 I would say, we sit and brainstorm what areas do we need to cover. Then we say an area of what influences respondents, an area of the significance of opinion polls, an area of previous opinion polls and how they have impacted, or how different they were from the outcome, and we cover all that so that the reader reading it understands actually what the fuss is about right now. And I wanted to also say something about what influences responders. When you go to ask for an opinion poll, you don't have the military and the police surrounding you, so people will answer openly, genuinely, and that's not something that will happen at the day of voting. Some people are deterred from voting by the military. Some people go and are forced to vote otherwise. I have heard those stories from people that were agents or people that actually participated in that. So if a newsroom sits and says, this opinion poll is out, after we have told people that an opinion poll is out, what more should we tell them? So you look at all these areas and see how to cover them.
All right, finally, concluding remarks from each of you. This is just the first opinion poll. Research World International is only one of the polling firms that deals with Uganda's politics. We expect the Afrobarometer to release their results anytime soon.
Even there are those privately sanctioned opinion polls which will never even become public.
Yes, so
I hope newsrooms look out for those things, because when you look at that book edited by Sabit Makara, in the 2011 polls, there was only one opinion poll which was made public, but 2 other polls had been made privately, and they remain private.
So
if I'm in the newsroom today, I would be interested in even looking at how the different political parties are internally receiving that poll. Because what they say in the public domain is completely different from what happens in the inside.
Yes,
like, for instance, if your candidate is scored 1%, what are they thinking internally at the Alliance for National Transformation, where I speak for? How are they receiving it? What about Norbert Mao, who has already just previously announced that he's going to stand? Or General Tumukunde or Robert Chagulanyi, if they have received 22%, they are now overtaken Dr. Besigye. Besigye has announced that he's not going to stand, but still, you know very well he was scored 17%. Obvious at that time he had not expressed his wish. He has expressed the fact that he is not going to stand. By the way, has he said that he's not going to stand? At least
not yet official.
Yes,
not yet in
but if his score is at that, if you're Chagulanyi, what do you do? If you are political position and you see that if you look at the combined figure, it's 22 plus 17, it goes to 30, 39 plus 1, 41. 41, almost 42%. And President Museveni is at 47. What effort do you put in? How are they responding as a collective pool of the political position? Even within the NRM, how are they receiving the polls? Because I know that some of these guys, like, for instance, President Museveni doesn't take some of these things lightly. Yeah, publicly he can even dismiss and say, that's all gouache. It's not, doesn't reflect what will happen. But he doesn't take things lightly. That's why he has managed to be in power for a long time. So as a newsroom, we'd be interested in knowing the reception of those opinion polls by the respective political players, even the institutions. Then lastly, be interested in the people who conducted the polls. There are people down the ranks within the organization that has carried out research, the researchers themselves, to just mine the data. Perhaps what they collected is not what was eventually shown to the public. You need to break that kind of story. I don't think the story is done. The story is still out there.
All right, Agatha, what do you hope newsrooms can do different reporting the opinion poll moving forward?
We are talking about just opinion polls.
Yes,
yeah,
yes, opinion polls.
Even this one.
I already said what I think. Let's look at what opinion polls mean in the wider scheme of things, how they have impacted electoral results before, if they do, and maybe what does it mean for Museveni's the previous opinion poll and now, and also a newcomer like Bobi Wine, who has been in politics for just 3 years, to be at 22%. Maybe we'll look at that as well, and give the reader, like something to understand. Okay, this is what we should expect now that this opinion poll has done this, or we should also dismiss it and wait for polling day. Yes. All
right, Agatha and Suleiman, thank you so much for speaking to us on the Fourth Estate. Of course, that's one of the big stories that we're covering. The other big story that we're following up was the defections from different political camps, and we'll leave you with a documentary where we analyze what those defections mean, how the media covered those defections, and how different they could have been covered. Of course, we speak to Eliasa Muchibi, who is a senior editor with the Nation Media Group. From us, you have yourselves a good evening.
First of all, things are happening very quickly now, and a lot of information does come through. The newsmakers are doing everything possible to hide as much information from us as possible before it does happen. We did get pointers. The story was would inevitably leak because people had even printing posters and whatever. The unveiling of Lukwago as an FDC member became apparent on the eve, the day before. Night, it could no longer be hidden. And that happens when now information starts flowing from the people who have hatched it, the real newsmakers to their handlers and whatever. So by evening, that was on the eve, we certainly knew that Lukwago was going to cross. But it was still not very clear what else would happen at Najana Nkumbi on the day of the unveiling. Was he going to come with some other members of DP, estranged members of DP? Some of them, of course, made it easy for us. You could ask them and they tell you, no, I am undecided yet. Others kept us guessing, so that is why you would see, maybe when we came out that morning, we were not very committal. We knew about Lukwago, but we are not very certain about everything else.
It was perhaps the biggest news story of the week. A well-kept secret that Kampala's Lord Mayor, Elias Lukwago, the third most popular politician by votes, was crossing over to Uganda's biggest opposition party. Lukwago, a former die-hard Democratic Party member, had started his earlier tilt towards the FDC with his involvement in the People's Government, an activist group started by Kizza Besigye to reclaim what he says was a stolen election in 2016. But Lukwago's defection was also a carefully calculated move that would require of the press to do more digging. The question could still be asked whether he would run for the position of presidential flag bearer as he boosted the ranks of the party.
That question mark still hangs there actually, even up to now, because the FDC still has to clear the air on, first of all, whether they will have a presidential candidate of their own. And with Dr. Besigye still refusing to say he'll be the one, and although he hasn't ruled it out, he refuses to say whether he will be, and there are so many indications that he could still not stand. Of course, there have been options, and I think those three faces were put there because it is playing on the editor's mind, and again, going by the information that's going around, that maybe it could be one of those. So by the day we get to learn that it is very unlikely to be Lukwago, then if not, not him who, and stuff. So the question mark still hangs there. Lukwago is, on the same day that Lukwago was unveiled, the president's nomination ceremony was going on at their party headquarters. But of course then we knew it was just a matter of when. We knew that he would stand. On that same day, Norbert Mao held a press conference at the DP headquarters in Mengo, and a lot of time, of course, was committed to commenting on Lukwago. Just today, you have had the Honorable Cassiano Wadri announcing, I have joined ANT. So there's a lot of movement. It's about movement, but I think still Lukwago edges it because he's, even when he continued to work with the FDC, he had been working for the FDC for a number of years, particularly with Dr. Besigye, it was not clear whether he was going to make that final decision, because he had two options. He could go back and fight for DP. Maybe if Norbert Mao won't leave, would think of maybe splintering it and say this is whatever, it has happened in the past. He didn't do that, and then he just decided to go to the FDC. That was very big news. I mean, a very big decision, especially that there is now NUP, which has come up, and someone will be wondering, why not NUP? There are going to be very clear reasons why Lukwago doesn't go there, but I think NUP played its emergence from People Power, played a very big role in helping Lukwago to make that final decision.
The internal flexing of political muscles by Uganda's opposition has now played out clearly in the loyalties that each politician is choosing for the 2021 general election. For the media, the context for a story that will dominate much of the election coverage is plain to see, but putting facts to it and fleshing it out will require a lot of skill editors like Eriasa bring into the newsroom.
The information actually we have is that the Lord Mayor will not stand. And when he spoke at Najana Nkumbi, he was very clear. Him and Besigye, Dr. Besigye, they spoke, and they seemed to be urging members of the FDC and the wider opposition to be open to possibilities. You would do an educated guess to say I have not seen the FDC a lot more pliable to an agreement, maybe a coalition or something. And I think this uncertainty that is hovering about may just suggest that they have decided maybe they will contest the other positions, but not the presidency. So in my head, it looks very, very likely that when the FDC finally makes the decision and all the consultations are made and they are going to say they will back Kyagulanyi. That is my very strong suspicion. This is kind of the mad season. So many things are happening at the same time. If the only story on the day, as I told you, the president was being nominated and he said a lot of things there. There was a big press conference where Norbert Mao said a lot of things, and where Lukwago was unveiled and he made a speech. Dr. Besigye himself made a very powerful speech saying a lot of things about his interest in staying in what he calls the struggle for as long as he is still alive, or when President Museveni has left, or whichever comes earlier. So there are so many moving chips, and if it had just been the Lukwago story, I think Monitor and many other news news platforms would have given it a lot more attention, a lot of angles, a lot of things would have been explored to say, so that it is exhaustive. What I think up to now, as Thursday ends, there is a lot more to explore just about the Lukwago story. I have seen he has spoken here, it has been covered there and whatever, but it is not conclusive. And the only way to conclude it is, of course, to tie up all the loose ends. I have seen a lot of things hinted on, but not really definitively handled. And the why question is still hanging out there. It is something we still have to conclude. And then the what next. He gets in there, I mean, you'll have this suspicion that, well, FDC would be in much better stead if they had the Lord Mayor of Kampala. And maybe, because Lukwago has the capacity to marshal a lot of effort himself, campaign effort, if they could just grab Kampala, maybe, I don't know with how many councillors, FDC would just gain a lot from that. And then going forward now, because after this election is done, then there are going to be a lot of reconfigurations of the political struggle, who goes where, who will have been scattered and what they will do. And so I think the move for Lukwago to go to join FDC is not just for the election that is coming, but it may become even much more significant for the immediate post-2011 politics, perhaps launching in 2026.
Thank you so much for watching The Fourth Estate. That's all we could get for you this week. We look at the stories that the media covers and we analyze them in detail. We also question the media angles that they've taken. We question the context that the media relies on. We also question the sources that the media has relied on to tell some of the stories that they are telling. Thank you so much from us to you. Have yourselves a great weekend. But we leave you with what's happening on the social media side.